Hi, my name's John Kelsey. I'm National Trainer for Hard Hat Industry Solutions. This is a session from our Red Rhino Academy, our complete training course in electrical and structured cabling estimating using Red Rhino software. Welcome to our session on how to update material prices. In this session, we cover how to use a great feature in Red Rhino's purchase order module, which allows you to efficiently get material prices from your wholesaler or vendor, then load them back into your estimate. This session is applicable to both electrical and structured cabling estimating. By the time this session is finished, you will have learned two important new Red Rhino skills. First, how to create a request for quote to send to your vendors asking them for material price updates, and second, how to take the pricing information you get from your vendor and feed it back into your estimates. The feature I will be training you to use is Request for Quote, commonly known as RFQ. An RFQ is used when you are requesting that a vendor provide you with the latest prices for materials related to a specific estimate. This is done before you submit a proposal to your customer. To use the RFQ feature, you must have already created a new estimate. If you do not know how to do this, I recommend you first view our training video titled Setting Up Red Rhino. For this training segment, we'll start at our home page, and we'll begin with the assumption that you've already created an estimate with one or more sections, and that materials have been entered into the sections. In other words, you have an estimate in Red Rhino that includes materials for a job. Our example estimate will be for an electrical project, but the steps I will be demonstrating in today's session are equally applicable to structured cabling projects. I'll navigate to the example estimate I created for this training session to show you what I will be using. At the top left under Estimates and Proposals, I click List Estimates to navigate to the estimate list. Next, I'll click on the estimate named RFQ Example Estimate to open up the estimate we'll use for this session. Again, RFQ is an abbreviation for Request for Quote. Notice there are two sections in the example estimate. The first section is called Wire Offices. The second section is named Wire 3 Copy Machines. Creating and understanding the use of sections is covered in our first training session titled Setting Up Red Rhino, and in our seminar Wiring Your Business for Profit. If you do not understand the use of sections, please refer to those other training videos first. Next, I'm going to drill down in Wire Offices section to review the materials we'll be pricing. I'll click on View Takeoff, which takes us to the list of materials. There I'll click View Takeoff in the Wire Offices section. As seen here, it says Takeoff for Wire Offices. There are many material items listed in this estimate we're viewing. We're viewing this page in order to explain something. When creating an RFQ or PO, Red Rhino will aggregate the material quantities. In other words, Red Rhino adds all identical materials into one total quantity. There's one exception which I'll explain in a moment. To illustrate how Red Rhino aggregates materials, notice that line 1 is 90 feet of half-inch EMT, and line 7 is 120 feet of half-inch EMT. Let me circle it in red. Again, line 1's half-inch EMT, the quantity to the right is 90 feet. And also line 7 is half-inch EMT, quantity 120 feet. When I create a RFQ, Red Rhino will add these two amounts and display 210 feet of half-inch EMT for the estimate. Red Rhino will also show the total quantity of half-inch EMT set screw connectors and couplings and so on. It'll aggregate the list. Here's the exception. Red Rhino will aggregate all lines of like materials as long as you do not change the price of individual lines. In other words, if you don't drill in here and change the price of the materials here, then it will aggregate the list. If not, it will show separate line items. I'll show you in a few minutes what I mean. Next, I'm going to move on to creating an RFQ. When I create an RFQ, I'll select the materials from the estimate discussed. Let's go back to the estimate. Assuming you've completed the estimate like the one we just saw, we'll move to the first part of the training session, how to create a request for quote. From the estimate page, I'm going to click on RFQ menu and select New RFQ. On this page, you will select the vendor from the drop-down list. When you become a Rhino customer, there's one vendor set up in your Rhino, which is called Generic Vendor. We'll just leave it at that. We'll click on it, but that's all that you'll find in there as a new customer. I'm going to select Generic Vendor. Now you choose a name for the RFQ. It can be whatever you want, but I usually name it the same as the estimate, and I usually start with the name RFQ in capital letters. At this time, you can also specify the PO number and revision to use when you eventually convert the RFQ to a purchase order. I'm going to name the PO number 1200. Now, I'm not creating a PO, but in the future, if I do, that'll be the number of the purchase order. Optionally, you can set the date, which defaults to today's date. Just click on the calendar, select the date. Next, I'm going to click the Save button. When the RFQ is finished saving, you'll see the header information that you just entered, followed by a list of sections in the estimate and a list of items in these sections. Note that all sections and all items are selected by default. The little check boxes on the left, everything's selected. For sake of example, I'm going to say that we only want a quote for items in the section called Wire Office, so I'll uncheck the other section. And we'll save our new selection by clicking Save Section Selection. Note how the item list is changed to reflect only those items listed in this section that I selected. I want to emphasize that when Red Rhino or a PO is created, Red Rhino will add materials of a like kind together or aggregate the material list. I gave an earlier example of the 1/2 inch EMT. Now remember the exception, if you change the price of materials in the estimate line, it won't aggregate those items. Now back to selecting items for pricing. Since the items are default selected, I uncheck or deselect those items I don't want. In this case, I'm going to uncheck the supports. I'm going to uncheck mounting hardware and breaker termination and 3-phase floor mount transformer, etc. These are items that sometimes, some of the switchgear items, you would get those quoted from your wholesale vendors separate with your switchgear quote. I'm going to uncheck those items. And once you have them unchecked, you click Save Item Selection button at the right. It saves the items that you selected. Self-explanatory. At this point, the RFQ is completed and ready to be printed or emailed directly to your vendor. At the top of the page, you can choose Preview to print a copy or Email to email it. Click on the Email button at the top. Now type in the email address of the recipient, your wholesaler vendor. I also highly recommend that you carbon copy yourself. That way you'll have one in your inbox in your email. Type a message to your vendor if you'd like. I usually tell them what date I expect the price back by. Next, you click the Send button. I usually send it PDF. Once you email the RFQ, Rhino returns you to the RFQ page. You can navigate back home if needed by clicking the Home icon at the top of the page. Next, I'll show you an example Here's an example of what the document looks like to your wholesale vendor. The top says Request for Quote. Below is the materials description and information header. The header columns read Item Number, UPC, Description, Catalog Number, Manufacturer, UOM, which is Unit of Measure, and Quantity. At the far right, in the Unit Price Quote column, is where your wholesale vendor would write his price. Again, have them scan it or fax it and send it back to you. Next, I'll show a view of one that's already filled out from your wholesaler. So here's what the RFQ might look like when it's returned by your wholesale vendor with updated prices. We now move to the second part of today's training session, how to take the price information you get from your vendor and put it into your estimates. Now let's assume that you have received the prices back from your vendor. This is an example of the RFQ price by your wholesale vendor. Notice in the far right column, Unit Price column, how the prices of each items are written in. Next, I'll show you how to enter those numbers from your RFQ into Red Rhino and update the material prices in your estimate. First, you print out the pricing sheet your vendor sent you. Next, I'll go back to the home page. Our next step is to locate the RFQ that was sent to you, or to your wholesaler rather, in the Red Rhino. From the Estimate and Proposal pane of the home page, click List Estimates to navigate to the estimate list. We're going to go back to the estimate and look at the purchase, or rather the RFQs that are in there. Click on List Estimates. Click on the estimate there, RFQ Example Estimate. On the estimate page, I'm going to click RFQ option, the drop down. Again, top right, click on RFQ, select List RFQs. Rhino takes us to the RFQ list. If you had multiple requests for quotes, they would be displayed in here in the RFQ list. You can see that I created one other one just for example. Since there's two listed here, I'm going to say that I created a different one and sent it to a different vendor. That's something you might do. I click on the name of the RFQ we're working with, and again, it's important to name your RFQs so you can easily identify them. Red Rhino opens the RFQ. Next, I enter the new prices provided by my vendor in the Unit Price Quote column on the far right. You go down the list and fill out all the pricing items in the Unit Price Quote column at the far right. Just fill in everything. Again, print out the pricing sheet your vendor sent you. Type the prices in that you received from your wholesaler in the far right column. Now here's an example of the prices all filled out. To the right, I typed in the prices provided by the wholesale vendor. Again, and this is an example of it being completed. Next, I'm going to click the Save Quotes button. Then Rhino navigates me to the next page. Next, I'm going to click Update Estimate button at the top. And when I do, Red Rhino navigates me to the estimate, and Red Rhino just input the prices that I typed in into the section that I selected. In this example, I input material or change material prices of wire offices. And once you get them updated, go in and make sure that it made the update okay. Just always check everything. And there you'll see that it updated the prices according to what you typed in your request for quote. With this, we conclude our training session on how to update material prices. In this session, we have seen how to create a request for quote, or RFQ, to send to your vendors, asking them for material price updates. And we've seen how to take the price information you get from your vendor and update material prices in your estimates. Long story short, we showed you how to update your material prices with the latest prices from your wholesale vendor. This is John Kelsey saying goodbye for now. Thanks for watching this training session.